This is The Elephant's Child, written by Rudyard Kipling from the Just So Stories collection. In the nigh and far of times the elephant, O best beloved, had no trunk. He had only a blackish bugly nose, and as big as a boot that he could wriggle out from side to side, but he couldn't pick up things with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child. He is full of satiable curiosity. That means he asked ever so many questions. And he lived in Africa, and he filled all of Africa with his satiable curiosities. He asked his tall aunt, the ostrich, why her tail feathers grew just so, and his tall aunt, the ostrich, spanked him with her hard claw. He asked his tall uncle, the giraffe, what made his skin spotty, and his tall uncle, the giraffe, spanked him hard with his hoof. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red, and his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, spanked him with her broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so, and his hairy uncle, the baboon, spanked him with his hairy paw. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked questions about everything that he saw, or heard, or felt, or smelt, or touched. All his uncle and aunt spanked him, and still he was full of satiable curiosity. One fine morning, in the middle of the procession of the equinoxes, the satiable elephant's child asked a new fine question that he had never asked before. He asked, "What does that crocodile have for dinner?" Then everybody said, "Hush!" in a loud, dreadful tone, and they spanked him immediately and directly, without stopping, for a long time. By and by, when that was finished, he came upon a colour bird, sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush, and he said, "My father has spanked me, and my mother has spanked me. All my aunts and uncles have spanked me for my satiable curiosity, and still I want to know what the crocodile has for dinner." Then Colour Bird said, with a mournful cry, "Go to the banks of the great grey green, greasy Limpopo River, and set about with fever trees, and find out." The very next morning, when there was nothing left of the equinoxes, because the procession had proceeded according to its precedent, the satiable elephant's child took 100 pounds of bananas, the little short red kind, and 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long purple kind, and 17 melons, the greeny crackly kind, and said to his dear families, "Goodbye. I'm going to the great grey green greasy Limpopo River." All set about with fever trees to find out what the crocodile has for dinner, and they spanked him once more for luck, though he asked them to politely stop. Then he went away, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about, because he could not pick it up. He went from Grainstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley to Karma's country, and from Karma's country he went east by north, eating melons all the time, till at last came to the banks of the great grey green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, precisely as Colour Bird had said. Now you must know and understand, O best beloved, that till this very week, day and hour and minute, this satiable elephant's child had never seen a crocodile, and did not know what one was like. It was all his satiable curiosity. The first thing that he found was a bicoloured python rock snake curled up around a rock. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, most politely, "but have you seen such thing as a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" "Have I seen a crocodile?" said the bicoloured python rock snake, in a voice dreadful scorn. "What will you ask me next?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but could you kindly tell me what he has for dinner?" Then the bicoloured python rock snake uncoiled himself very quickly from the rock, and spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. "That is odd," said the elephant child, "because my mother and my father, and my uncle and my aunt, not to mention my other aunt the hippopotamus, and my other uncle the baboon, have spanked me for my satiable curiosity, and I suppose this is the same thing." So he said goodbye very politely, and the bicoloured python rock snake had helped him to coil himself up around the rock again, and went on, a little warm, but not all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he could not pick it up, till he trod on what he thought was a log of wood at the very end of the edge of the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. But it was really the crocodile, O best beloved, and the crocodile winked one eye like this. Excuse me, said the elephant child most politely, but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these promiscuous parts? Then the crocodile winked the other eye, and lifted half his tail out of the mud, and the elephant child stepped back most politely, because he did not wish to be spanked again. Come, Hitcher, little one, why do you ask such things? Excuse me, said the elephant child most politely, but my father has spanked me, and my mother has spanked me, not to mention my tall aunt the ostrich and my tall uncle the giraffe, who can kick ever so hard, as well as my broad aunt the hippopotamus and my hairy uncle the baboon, and including the bicoloured python rock snake with his scalesome flailsome tail, just up the bank, who spanks harder than any of them. And so it's quite the same to you. I don't want to be spanked any more. Come high, said little one, for I am the crocodile, and he wept crocodile tears to show it was quite true. Then the elephant child grew all breathless, and he panted, and kneeled down on the bank and said, You are the very person I have been looking for all these long days. Will you please tell me what you have for dinner? Come, Hysa, little one, said the crocodile, and I'll whisper. Then the elephant child put his head down to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth, and the crocodile caught him by his nose, which up to that very week, day, hour, and minute had been no bigger than a boot, though much more useful. I think, said the crocodile, and he said it between his teeth like this, I think today I will begin with Elephant's child. At this, O best beloved, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his nose like this, Let go, you be hurting me. Then the bicoloured python rock snake scuffled down from the bank and said, My young friend, if you do not now, immediately and instantly pull as hard as you ever can, it is my opinion that your acquaintance in the large patent leather ostler, and by this he meant the crocodile, will jerk you on into yonder Milford stream before you can even say Jack Robinson. This is the way the bicoloured python rock snakes always talk. Then the elephant child sat back on his little haunches and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose began to stretch, and the crocodile floundered his tail in the water, making it creamy with great sweeps of his tail. Pulled and he pulled and he pulled, and the elephant's child nose kept on stretching. The elephant's child spread all over his little four legs and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose continued to stretch. And the crocodile threshed his tail like an oar, and he pulled and he pulled and he pulled, and at each pull the elephant's child's nose grew longer and longer, and it hurt him hideous. Then the elephant's child felt his legs slipping, and he said through his nose, which is now nearly 5 feet long, This is too much for me. Then the bicoloured python rock snake came down from the bank and nodded himself in a double-clove hitch around the elephant's child's hind legs, and said, Rash and inexperienced traveller, we will now seriously devote ourselves to a little high tension, because if we do not, it is my impression that yonder self-propelling man of war in this armoured plate upper deck, and by this, O best beloved, he meant the crocodile, will permanently evaluate your future career. This was the way all bicoloured python rock snakes always talk. So he pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled, but the elephant's child and the bicoloured python rock snake pulled hardest, and at last the crocodile let go of the elephant child's nose with a plop that you could hear all the way up and down the Limpopo. Then the elephant's child sat down most hard to the sudden, but he was first careful to say thank you to the bicoloured python rock snake. And next he was kind to his poor pulled nose and wrapped it up in cool banana leaves and hung it from the great grey green greasy Limpopo pool. What are you doing that for? Said the bicoloured python rock snake. Excuse me, said the elephant child, but my nose is badly out of shape, and I'm waiting for it to shrink. Then you will have to wait a long time, said the bicoloured python rock snake. Some people do not know what is good for them. The elephant's child sat there for 3 days waiting for his nose to shrink, but it never grew any shorter. And besides, it made him squint, for, O best beloved, you will see and understand that the crocodile had pulled it out into its really truly trunk, same as all elephants have today. At the end of the 3rd day a fly came and stung him on the shoulder, and before he knew it, he was lifting up his trunk and hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Advantage number one," said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a merely smear nose. Try and eat a little now." Before he thought what he was doing, the elephant's child put his trunk out and plucked a large bundle of grass, dusted it clean against his forelegs, and stuffed it into his own mouth. "Advantage number two," said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with your mere spear nose. Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "It is," said the elephant child, and before he thought of what he was doing, he slooped a sloop of mud from the banks of the great grey, greasy Limpopo and slapped it on his head, where it made a cool, sloopy, splashy mud cap trickling behind his ears. "Advantage number three," said the bicoloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with your mere smear nose. Now how do you feel about being spanked again?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but I should not like that at all." "How would you like to spank somebody?" said the bicoloured python rock snake. "I would like that very much indeed," said the elephant's child. "Well," said the bicoloured python rock snake, "you will find that new nose of yours is very useful to spank people with." "Thank you," said the elephant's child. "I'll remember that. And now I think I'll go home to my dear families and try." The elephant child went home, across Africa, frisking and whisking his trunk. When he wanted fruit to eat, he pulled it down from a tree, instead of waiting for it to fall, as he used to do. When he wanted grass, he plucked it up from the ground, instead of going on his knees, as he used to. When the flies bit him and broke the branch of the tree with the fly whisk. When the flies bit him, he broke off the branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk. And he made himself a new, cool, slushy, squashy mud cap whenever the sun was hot. When he felt lonely walking through Africa, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the nose was louder than several brass bands. And he went specially out of his way to find a broad hippopotamus, she was no relation of his, and spanked her very hard, to make sure that the bicoloured python rock snake had spoken the truth about his new trunk. The rest of the time he picked up the melon rinds that he had dropped on his way to the Limpopo, for he was a tidy pachyderm. One dark evening he came back to his dear families, and he coiled up his trunk and said, "How do you do?" They were very glad to see him, and immediately he said, "Come here and be spanked for your satiable curiosity." "Pooh," said the elephant's child, "I don't think you peoples know about spanking, but I do, and I'll show you." Then he uncurled his trunk and knocked two of his dear brothers head over their heels. "Oh, bananas," they said, "where did you learn that trick, and what have you done to your nose?" "I got a new one from the crocodile at the banks of the great grey greasy Limpopo River," said the elephant's child. "I asked him what he had for dinner, and he gave me this to keep." "It looks very ugly," said his hairy uncle the baboon. "It does," said the elephant's child, "but it's very useful." And he picked up his hairy uncle the baboon by one hairy leg and hove him into a hornet's nest. Then that bad elephant's child spanked all his dear families for a long time, so they were very warm and greatly astonished. He pulled out his tall ostrich arched tail feathers, and he caught his tall uncle giraffe by the hind leg and dragged him through the corn bush. Then he shouted at his broad aunt the hippopotamus and blew bubbles into her ear as she was sleeping in the water after meals. But he never let anyone touch Colo Colo Bird. At last things grew so exciting that his dear families went off, one by one, into a hurry up the banks of the great green greasy Limpopo River, and they all set about with fever trees to borrow their noses from the crocodile. When he came back, nobody spanked anybody any more, and ever since that day, O best beloved, all the elephants you will see, besides the ones that you won't, have trunks, precisely like the trunks of the satiable elephant's child. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Names were what, why, and when, and how, and where, and who. I send them over land and sea. I send them east and west. But after they have worked for me, I give them all a rest. I let them rest from 9 till 5, for I am busy then, as well as breakfast, lunch, or tea, for they are hungry men. But different folk have different views. I know a person small. She keeps 10 million serving men who get no rest at all. She sends them aboard her own affairs the second she opens her eyes. 1 million hows, 2 million wheres, and 70 million whys.